Welcome to a special extra of Disaffected on August 10th, 2025. This is what I hope will become an evergreen segment for you guys. This is a basic lesson in cluster B. We're going to talk about borderline personality disorder, what it is, where it comes from, what to do about it. So this is definitely a get your pen and paper kind of segment. Thanks for joining us for the show tonight. Obviously, anybody who listens to the show knows that I talk about cluster B personality disorders constantly. It's my bag, and it's my bag because I had a mother who was a trailer park version of Joan Crawford. My mother has narcissistic and borderline personality disorders. And if you are interested in a more full picture of what that looks like in a child's life, go back 4 years, do it on either Rumble or YouTube, and look for the episodes Over the Borderline, parts 1 and 2. They were made in the spring of 2021. Over the Borderline, parts 1 and 2. Before age 41, when I learned what cluster B personality disorders actually were, and before I understood that my mother really was a deeply disturbed and wicked person who was not capable of loving her children and did not love her children, I had no explanation for my fear of her. And I didn't have an explanation for my lifelong mental illnesses. I've been variously diagnosed with major depressive disorder, obsessive compulsive disorder, panic disorder, and my favorite disorder I learned about when I went to my doctor about 7 years ago to get help for my drinking problem. I told him, I said, I've been an alcoholic for years and I've been lying to you. And the very first thing that my doctor said to me was, oh, we don't use that term anymore. You have substance use disorder. I left and then I quit cold turkey on my own. On breaking with my mother, though, in 2016, and seeing what cluster B was, I quickly saw that the same deranged psychology I was seeing at home had exploded into mainstream culture, and particularly the political and cultural left. The left today is cluster B. It's not like cluster B. It is an example of cluster B. What used to be recognized as selfish, narcissistic, manipulative, and destructive emotional and antisocial behavior is now considered valid and authentic and living your best life. This is especially true among young women and women generally, who are showing far more deranged narcissism than men as a whole in our era. Again, you have to supply all of your own not alls. I don't take it back, and I'm not going to qualify it any further. We are living in a gynocracy of women who behave somewhere on the spectrum that my mother lives on psychologically. They're resentful, entitled, self-regarding, exploitative, and they're proud of it. They're man-hating, and it's become perfectly fine to abuse and neglect children and use them as props on social media. You get applauded for it if you're a mommy. There are men with cluster B personality disorders too, of course, but they are not pampered by society to the extent that wicked women get a free pass for this behavior. That's why we're talking about women. The worst of the men in this regard, as you know, are the homosexuals who, for all intents and purposes, are functionally personality disordered women. I say this as a man who used to be one of them. So what are cluster B personality disorders? And everything you're going to see on your screen, these are all my words. It's not attributable to anybody else. A personality disorder is what it sounds like. It means there's something deeply disturbed or deviant about someone's character. Yes, I'm talking about moral character. Cluster B disorders are usually the result of having been abused. That's true. But they are not a medical disability. They are not a, quote, condition that means that, oh, well, he's not responsible for his behavior, so we have to be understanding and cater to him. Personality and character disorders are states of profound moral error, just as much as they are responses to childhood traumas. And personality disorders are more fundamental in a way than what I call classic mental illness like schizophrenia or manic depression. Personality disorders describe who the person is on a deep level in every domain of life. They're not like a dark cloud that just occasionally covers up an otherwise lovely person. There are some gray areas with borderline personality disorder, and we're going to talk about those in a few minutes. So cluster B, the term cluster B, refers to one of the three clusters of personality disorders according to the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. There are clusters A, B, and C. We are only concerned with cluster B. These are known as the dramatic and erratic personality disorders. So, what are the four cluster B personality disorders? Number one, borderline. These are emotionally unstable, lacking a sense of identity, prone to periodic psychosis, manipulative. The core fear of the borderline is being abandoned, but the borderline is usually abandoned because no one can tolerate her abuse. She creates her own abandonment. Next is histrionic personality disorder, wildly exaggerated emotional responses, emotions that change instantly and seem fleeting, shallow, vague, or insincere. Histrionics often use vague and flowery language, and there's a lack of specificity. The histrionic likes to set an emotional atmosphere in which they can play act. Overweening sexual provocation is a classic sign of the histrionic female. Madonna is a good example. For the male side, Nathan Lane's character in the film The Birdcage is an archetypal example of the histrionic gay male. Next is narcissistic personality disorder, and these people lack empathy for others. They have obsessive self-preoccupation and a belief that they're superior to all others and that they don't need to reciprocate care and duty, but they are to be given these things by other people. It's a one-way street. NPD, narcissistic personality disorder, often includes delusions of being either perfectly beautiful, perfectly intelligent, perfectly compassionate, perfectly empathetic, etc., etc. And finally, we have antisocial personality disorder, which is commonly known as sociopathy or psychopathy. These people have a complete lack of empathy and a profound inability to see or understand that other people are not objects to use, but they are people with feelings. The psychopath is often parasitic, living off other people's hard work and manipulating other people to get his needs met. Now, what I just gave you is a quick sketch, a quick walkthrough of a very complicated topic. The system of personality disorders in the DSM can be misleading, so I want to tease a couple of things out for you. You heard me say that there are apparently 4 cluster B personality disorders. It isn't really true that they're entirely distinct. The kind of mind, the kind of psychology, the kind of person that we call cluster B, that is a real and identifiable category. It objectively exists in the real world. But there are very few people who have only borderline personality and nothing at all from histrionic, narcissistic, or antisocial. For example, you can use that with any of them. There are some people who hew more closely to the pure form. They look like they're mainly or only borderline or mainly and only narcissistic, for example. But most cluster B people have a healthy dose of traits from one or more of the other cluster B personality disorders. As an example, my mother's primary personality derangement is informed by borderline and narcissistic traits. But she's also very well versed in histrionics and has fallen into states of psychopathy, not caring for other people, being completely manipulative and conscience-free. An example of this is when she had custody of a 4-year-old little girl in my life. My mother decided she wanted something more out of life, so she abandoned her 4-year-old child. She abandoned her husband, and she got on a plane to England to start a new life with a drunk poet that she met on Facebook. She just took up and left. That is a demonstration of a complete lack of empathy and moral concern for her child and her family. She did come back a few weeks later, but that's a story for another episode. So let's recap. I want to consolidate this for you. While there are allegedly 4 discrete cluster B disorders, they're not actually discrete. Most people overlap. When I talk about someone like my mother, for example, and I say she has borderline personality disorder, I'm not saying, and no other characteristics from other disorders. I'm merely using a shorthand to convey to you in a simple form the most important things that I want to draw your attention to. So, what is borderline personality disorder specifically? First, let's do some definitions. The word borderline is misleading here. It does not mean, well, almost a personality disorder, but not really. That is not what the word borderline means. Wrong. Borderline personality is fully a severe psychological derangement, fully a personality disorder. They're not on the borderline of being normal. I'll tell you what they're on the borderline of, but it's not normal. The term borderline came from earlier psychiatric theorists like Adolf Stern and Otto Kernberg. It means on the border between neurosis and psychosis. What does that mean? I'm going to define it for you. Neurosis means high negative feelings, high negative emotionality, depression, rage, despair, anxiety, rumination, paranoia, etc. Negative emotionality. All of us, all humans, have a level of neurosis. That is normal. All humans have this. Those with personality disorders and some other conditions have such a marked excess that it's obvious, or it ought to be obvious, that their psychology is far outside normal and healthy. So that's neurosis. Neurosis is negative emotionality. What is psychosis? Psychosis means being actually disconnected from reality. It might mean paranoid persecution fantasies. That's very common in borderline personality. It might mean seeing or hearing voices in people who don't exist, so it might mean hallucinations. Not necessarily, but it might. It might mean being unable to recognize reality and the actual nature of people around you as they are, rather than how you are constructing them in your mind. And again, another disambiguation. Psychosis does not mean psychopathic, negative. Break that association in your head. They are not the same thing at all. Psychosis, remember, only means being disconnected from reality, whether that's temporary or permanent. You may have known people, you may have seen examples of people who have temporary drug-induced psychosis. They got a bad batch of cocaine or something like that. It can come and go. It can be very dangerous, but they're not psychopathic. They're psychotic, disconnected from the real world. So borderline personality disorder refers to people who vacillate between their already elevated baseline neurosis, their negative emotionality, and out of touch with reality psychosis. They're constantly riding that borderline. That's borderline personality disorder. So there's no state that's not normal. There's nothing normal and non-disordered about this, but that's what they're vacillating between. They often present as hysterical, excessively demanding or paranoid, and they're often cruel to other people, most especially people they claim to love. The core fear of the borderline is being abandoned, but they create relationship dynamics that drive people away until they do abandon the borderline. This is where the popular phrase, "I hate you, don't leave me," comes from when people talk about borderline personality disorder. And there's a good book by that title, "I Hate You, Don't Leave Me," that you might enjoy reading. Borderlines also cycle through what is called the idealization/devaluation cycle. Here's a made-up vignette, but it's accurate. We're going to talk about Caitlin. Caitlin is a sociable young woman who likes to go out drinking and dancing with friends. She's always got a boyfriend, although her relationships don't last very long, and she usually has another man in the wings while she's dating the last guy. When Caitlin meets a new man, she showers him with attention and affection and sexual attention. It's over the top, but it feels absolutely wonderful to the guy that she's dating. She tells him that he's the sexiest, smartest, most fascinating man that she's ever met. And Caitlin, though, she's told about half a dozen men in the past 2 years that they're her soulmate and unlike anyone she's ever met. But within a few months, Caitlin starts to sour on her new boyfriend. Maybe he didn't answer a text message quickly enough. Maybe he wasn't able to make the Friday night party because he got called into work at the last minute. Caitlin does not take this in stride. Instead, she feels that he is abandoning her and she gets emotionally activated. Caitlin's reaction to this alleged abandonment shocks the people around her. Where a few minutes ago she was describing Mark as the perfect man, today she's telling her girlfriends that he's withholding affection in an abusive way, that he has devastated her, that he's unreliable, and that he's like every other shitty man who's used her and thrown her away. With a woman like Caitlin, there's a very high likelihood that she will go farther than this. She might accuse him of unwanted sexual advances, either directly or by implication. Yes, it is contradictory. This woman, Caitlin, who wants to sleep with a guy, she will turn right around and say, oh, he got weird with me. He got creepy. Yes, it is a contradiction. Welcome to borderline personality disorder. Caitlin will almost certainly begin a gossip and reputation smearing campaign among her women friends, as they are prone to gossip and they're very likely to believe women who gossip about their men. Even if she doesn't state an accusation out loud, Caitlin will likely persuade people to see Mark as unstable, duplicitous, and perhaps even a rapist or a sexual abuser. If you've wondered what would drive a woman to make false rape allegations, not always, but most of the time, borderline personality disorder. That is the cycle of idealization and devaluation. It's expressed in, as I said before, the popular phrase, I hate you, don't leave me. In plain terms, the borderline is the emotionally unstable and manipulative woman who cannot be satisfied by any actions you take, no matter how many sacrifices you make for her. Nothing will fill the void. You cannot do it. None of you listening can do it. You will find that many gay men who have, I'm sorry, disturbingly high rates of personality disorders, mental illness, and addiction compared to heterosexuals, these gay men often behave exactly like borderline women do when they have that condition. Now let's talk about what borderline personality disorder is not. This is just as important as what it is. There's an almost universal confusion about borderline that the majority of people have. You have it, many of you listening, your doctor has it, your therapist probably has it too. This confusion comes from the fact that most doctors and therapists routinely overlook or misdiagnose people who have borderline personality disorder. What do they mistakenly diagnose them with instead? Bipolar disorder. We're not going to use that new euphemism again. I'm not even going to say the word again because it sows confusion. We're going to use the older and more accurate term, manic depression. Borderline personality disorder is not manic depression. It's not even in the same category. Manic depression is a mood disorder. Borderline personality is a personality or character disorder. Lithium and similar medications can help the majority, although not all, manic depressives. By contrast, there are no drugs of any kind that can treat borderline or any other cluster B personality disorder. There is no pill that makes an emotionally dysregulated person with an ingrained inability to accurately perceive themselves and others. There's no pill that cures your personality. Why? Because personality disorders are distortions of moral character and distortions of emotional processing at the deepest level of who a person is. Manic depression is not. It's also easy to confuse these two because there is some symptom overlap. Both borderlines and manic depressives have marked and obvious mood swings. But it's also incredibly easy to distinguish them. So after you're done, I'm in the next paragraph, there's no reason for you to ever be confused again. How do you do it? Well, manic depressives cycle from depression to mania over a period of months, sometimes weeks. They stay in one state for months. The onset is gradual and usually predictable. And contrary to popular belief, actually, manic depressives don't spend equal amounts of time in both profound depression and then manic elation. It's more like 90-10. They spend most of their time in a depressive or a quasi-depressive state. Now, compare that with borderlines. Borderlines will swing their moods within seconds, minutes, or hours at most. A borderline like my mother can go from just hysterical, profound despair while talking about suicide to switching over to raucous laughter and delight and pleasure within 15 minutes. That's what I grew up with. That was our life. So I strongly suggest that you drop the term bipolar from your vocabulary completely and stop using the initialism BPD. You are never going to be accurately understood. The vast majority of people will think you're talking about manic depression. They'll hear bipolar. So there's no reason for this. It's not difficult. It's very easy. Stop using the term bipolar. Stop using the initialism. If you want to communicate about borderline, write the full word borderline or say it. If you mean manic depression, use the term manic depression. And if any of you are ready to object because, well, that's not the official name anymore, I don't play that on this show. Doctors and researchers like to come up with euphemisms for things and new names to put a feather in their cap, and often, frankly, to confuse people and remove the stigma. The stigma should not be removed. The stigma is earned. If your mother or father sounds anything like mine, and you've believed all these years that they have bipolar or manic depression, they almost certainly don't. They almost certainly have a cluster B personality disorder. And also, this is my opinion. I don't believe there's any such thing as bipolar type 2 rapid cycling. I think that's a bunch of bullshit. I don't care that the DSM or your friend's doctor says bipolar 2 is so real. It's not, and it's obvious that it's not and what's going on. What's going on is borderline. Rapid cycling is borderline. So, can borderline personality disorder be treated or cured? This is a huge gray area with a lot of disagreement among professionals and lay people. There are so many moving parts and there are so many different definitions of recover and personality disorder that it's really hard to nail this down. I'm going to give you my best guess here. I am unsure of the answer to that question of whether it can be cured, but this is what I think right now, given the information that I have. I think this provisionally, and I will change my mind if accumulated data and experience prods me to do so. Yes, theoretically, borderlines can recover, but, and this is a very important but, most borderlines will not recover. Yes, I am aware that you have heard recently, or you've read recently, something like 80% of borderlines recover spontaneously by the age of 35. No, I don't believe that's true in a straightforward way, but that's outside the scope of this episode. I may take that up in another show. It does appear to be true that those with a high helping of borderline traits, they may be subclinical, but they've got obvious borderline traits. Many of them do naturally mellow out as middle age approaches. But that's a far cry from saying that a fully diagnosable case of cluster B, they just become normal all by themselves by turning 35 or 40. I don't think that's true. So for a borderline to recover or to make such significant progress that you could call it recovery, it usually takes a combination of 3 factors. And this combination, unfortunately, happens rarely. Factor number 1 is youth. The younger, the better. The older you get, the more calcified your personality. So getting treatment in your late teens or your 20s is best. I don't want to discourage anyone who's struggling with this who may be older from getting treatment, but I do want to say to you, if you've got a young person in your life, now is the time to get help. Stop dithering around. Stop worrying that, well, he's going to abandon me, or he's going to think I'm abandoning him. He's going to think that anyway. Bite the bullet and do your job as a parent or a guardian. Tell the truth. Get them in the right treatment. Factor number 2, they need an old school, non-woke therapist who understands actual trauma, real trauma, not millennial Gen Z claim trauma, but actual psychological trauma, and understands personality distortion. Anyone educated as a mental health pro in the past 20 years is probably incompetent, and they will probably validate the borderline behaviors and call them healthy, especially if it occurs in a woman. Factor 3. A person has to have an internal ability to accept and understand that the majority of the problem is inside their mind, not inside other people. This is extremely difficult for people to take. It means that you have to willingly take personal moral responsibility for your own damage, which is almost unbearably painful to many borderlines, and for good reason. Because they got this way because they were victims of extreme child abuse or neglect, and many of them cannot summon the ego strength to be able to hear that the problem is them. It is too threatening. It is too frightening to them. They experience that as a total condemnation of them as a person. It really is the ultimate abandonment. And you could say, as an audience member listening to this, you could say to me, well, Josh, you're talking about this in really stark terms, and you're saying that they have bad moral character. I know. These things are in tension. There are gray areas, and you have to be careful, but I'm afraid it is as bad as it looks. I have clients, my consulting clients, I have a couple who have been diagnosed with borderline personality disorder. What separates them from the vast majority of borderlines you're going to run into is that they understand that they have a condition. They know it's hard work. They know it's not their fault that they became that way, but they know it's their responsibility to work with a therapist to get better. They're an entirely different category of person from the unrepentant, unreflective cluster B. And I am delighted to see the progress that they make. So I don't want to discourage that. So you see that this problem becomes kind of recursive, and it makes the condition hard, or in some cases, many cases actually, hard or impossible to treat. My own therapist says that he has seen borderlines recover the way I've talked about above, but even he says that most cluster B personality disorder cases are not going to recover. Now, here's the personal part, and this is speculative too. I remain uncertain, but this is what I think. I think that I qualified for a borderline and/or a histrionic personality diagnosis in my teens and most of my 20s. To my knowledge, I have never received such a diagnosis, but if I did, I think it would have been accurate or close to accurate. Borderline and histrionic personalities come from real childhood trauma, and I displayed the classic signs. Addiction, promiscuity, I would take any drug, often a total inability to control my emotions, exacerbated by constant drinking for 20 years, choosing bad people as my lovers and friends. I was often histrionic and needy and really unbearable as a friend. Really hard work. I'm not such a treat now, but you should have seen me then. You see my histrionic traits, some of them on this show, because they make a person a good entertainer too. But in my youth, I was like this most of the time in most settings. I'm not now. You good folks in the audience don't know me outside the show, but in real life, I'm usually a lot calmer and a lot more boring. I mostly stay at home, and when I socialize, I have friends over and I cook in my stocking feet. I don't hold court in bars anymore. In my 30s, the worst of my hard edges started to smooth over, seemingly on their own. I think age had something to do with it. This does appear to happen with many borderlines, but then the question is, are they really borderlines? Are they quasi-borderlines? Are they subclinical? I'd be really interested in what you think. I mean, anywhere you see this, you can leave a comment. Tell me what you think about this. And still, at age 50, I still have borderline and histrionic traits. And I think it's fair to say that my base personality style, that's different from a disorder. Personality style is different. My base personality style, I think, is histrionic. I think that's accurate. Like an actor. It's who I am. Great stress brings my worst traits out, and social media overindulgence does too. Social media has the ability to bring out the worst in most people. You would think it was actually designed to provoke cluster B behavior in anyone who sits down in front of it. But in my 40s, I finally learned what cluster B really was, what childhood trauma could really do, and I broke from my extraordinarily abusive mother, and then I stopped drinking. And then my view on the world, politics, culture, and religion changed completely, not overnight. Over the course of 5, 6, 7, 8, now it's 9 years. Everything changed. In my 40s, I also had the good fortune to find that old school, non-woke therapist who was educated before woke took over the Mental Health Academy. And I would not have made the progress that I've made in these past 7 years that I've been seeing and without him. And I thank God he came into my life. For what it's worth, my therapist agrees. He didn't know me then either, but he agrees I probably was a borderline and a histrionic when I was in my teens and 20s, but he doesn't think I have a personality disorder now, although the remnants are, of course, still there. And I think I told you before, I'm going to wrap this up here. But I've told you that I have clients with borderline traits, and I have a few that have been diagnosed with borderline personality disorder. And the very fact that these people, I'm not a therapist, as you know, but what I do is therapy adjacent. And the very fact that a person can come to a provider, I'm falling into the terminology. They're going to seek out a therapist. They're going to seek out a coach or somebody like me and say, I know this is my problem. I talked to one just last week. He said, I know I have a really hard time regulating my emotions, and I want to get better at this because people don't deserve to hear what comes out of my mouth. This is a guy who's taking responsibility for himself. If anyone's going to recover, he is. And frankly, he's done most of his recovery already. So it's not a rosy picture, but it isn't completely bleak either. And if you would like somebody to talk to about this, whether it's yourself, somebody in your family, that's what I do. That's what I offer myself for at Slocum Consulting. Take a look at joshuaslocum.net. I offer private, confidential, 1-hour video consultations on, basically any topic you want. If you just want to book and shoot the shit, we can do that. I had a couple of those last week and it was a lot of fun. But if you've got an acute problem, or if you've got a family member or an emotional problem you want to talk about for yourself, I'm here for you on that as well. And my show is not a performance. Listen to me, I'm mixing it up. I'm trying to clarify it for you. When we talk in a consulting session, it's not my show. It's not Twitter. I'm not performing for you, and you're not performing for me. I am there to serve you. That's what it's about. And everything that we talk about is going to remain confidential. So take a look. If you don't see anything on my calendar that fits, send me an email through the site. I'll schedule you off hours. Everybody, thank you very much. I hope this has been a helpful overview of borderline personality disorder.